Welcome to this update on red squirrels, Northern England, titled Come On You Reds. Red squirrel conservation with the Northumberland Wildlife Trust has been running for over 25 years, almost 30 years actually, in various shapes and forms. It started off as Red Alert in the 1990s, changed to Save Our Squirrels in the noughties, and then Red Squirrels Northern England since 2012. Red squirrels and grey squirrels have had a bit of a competition over the years. Greys were introduced in the late 1900s in various parts of the country, and as you can see on the map on the left-hand side, representing 1945, grey squirrels started to already then spread across the country to the south. The map in the middle is year 2000 and shows a tremendous progress of distribution spread of grey squirrels, and the grey area obviously being grey, the orangey colour being where both species occur, and then reds where reds were remaining. Map on the far right hand side shows how much things have changed since then. And around 2005, the Forestry Commission decided to designate 17 large conifer forests in the north of England as strongholds. These were sort of refuges for red squirrels, just because conifer forests tend to exclude grey squirrels. They can't really thrive in it so much. They do occur on the boundaries, but they just can't thrive on the small seeded conifer species. They really need our native broadleaf woodlands. These refuges or strongholds have been successful to a degree, and more so in some cases than others. On red squirrels, just a little bit about their ecology and the squirrels themselves. I think we can all recognize red squirrels with the ear tufts in the cooler months. They've got a single colored tail, can range from being blonde to proper red. They're much smaller in body size. They live in drays up in trees. It looks a little bit like an untidy crow's nest. They're very difficult to spot in the woodlands. So recent research showed that only 20% of drays can be detected during surveys in a conifer forest. So they are difficult to spot. What do they eat? Well, a variety of foods ranging from nuts, berries, seeds, fungi, buds, flowers, and so on. Here is an example of some cones that have been stripped by squirrels. Sadly, you can't tell whether it was a red or a grey squirrel. On the left, top left, is a Scots pine, and then just below that are spruce trees. And on the right-hand side, you can see hazelnuts. The two pictures at the top have been cracked by squirrels, and the one at the bottom was by a mouse. If you can see that over there. There are a few more examples. Clockwise from top left is Douglas fir, and then there's Sitka spruce, larch, and then bottom left is Scots pine. So keep an eye out for these in the woods. It is indicative of the presence of squirrels in the wood. Unfortunately, you can't tell whether it was reds or greys. Squirrels, they tend to have particular patterns of activity during the winter, less active than the other warmer months, and there tends to be a peak mid-morning. So they do spend a lot of time in their drays, but they still have to forage for food. They don't hibernate. And then the next graph down shows in springtime and autumn. There are two more pronounced peaks, mid-morning or early morning and mid-afternoon, and then in the summer months it becomes even more pronounced. Quite busy early in the morning, afternoon nap, and then busy again late afternoon. Baby squirrels are born blind, deaf and hairless, and it takes about 3 weeks for them to develop fur on the ears and for their eyes to open. when they are about 7 weeks old, they more or less mini adults, and at the age of about 10 weeks, it's time for them to become independent, and often their parents do sort of leave them to it and boot them out of the nest, if you like. Threats to squirrels range from habitat fragmentation or loss of habitat. Got to bear in mind that the conifer afforestation over the last 100 years has been a tremendous help to squirrels because it does provide habitat. Although it's not a native conifer forests, tend to be not native woodlands or forests, consisting mostly of Sitka spruce, larch and Norway spruce and so on, but they still do provide food and habitat. Then other threats obviously include domestic pets can be an issue. Road deaths do still occur. Some places people have put up signs to help people be more aware of the traffic. And then of course grey squirrels are the most significant threat to red squirrels because they're also a carrier of the squirrelpox disease. And grey squirrels, yes, I think we're all familiar with this much bigger animal, almost twice the size of a red squirrel. They've got no ear tufts and they're quite stocky. The colour obviously is a giveaway, but the tail also has sort of a 3-colour effect where it looks like a halo because of the white tips of the hair. So it's a good indication to look out for if you're just spotting a squirrel in the corner of your eye in the woods. Look for that halo effect on the tail. As mentioned, grey squirrels do carry the squirrelpox disease. Firstly, they outcompete reds, and this can happen in a particular location over a period of 15 years, just because greys breed much faster and just by sheer numbers outcompete and replace red squirrels. Add to that the squirrelpox disease, and grey squirrels would replace reds 20 times faster. Squirrelpox disease is quite unpleasant, and it's lethal to our reds, resulting in death in about 15 days. And the next video will give a little bit more information on that.
Research has shown that up to 70% of grey squirrels carry squirrelpox disease. The grey squirrels act as a host for the infection, whereas the red squirrels die after prolonged suffering. Once a red squirrel contracts squirrelpox, they have about 10 days where they show no symptoms at all, but are capable of spreading the disease to other red squirrels. After roughly about 10 days of the red squirrel being infected with squirrelpox, it will start to show signs. So before that, you can't tell if a squirrel has squirrelpox simply by looking at it. There are no signs whatsoever, but they'll start to see these blisters around the eyes and the hands and the feet and the ears that you can see here. And these blisters will swell so much that the eye will eventually close. The squirrel will either starve to death because it can't find any food, or it can't eat any food because of the blisters, or the blisters will get infected and then they can get a sort of sepsis infection which will eventually cause them to die. It is not yet fully understood how pox is transmitted. However, some theories suggest it might be through bites, ticks, mites and fleas. Squirrels are constantly popping into each other's drays, which are littered with thousands of these tiny creatures. But research is ongoing into this. So if you find a dead red squirrel that is clearly suffering from some sort of infection, the first step would be to send it to the lab to get tested. Whilst you're waiting for the results from the lab, it would be beneficial to clean all feeding stations with antiviral spray and, if possible, to remove them. Removing the feeding stations will limit the contact between squirrels and therefore reduce the risk of infection. So to summarise, you can't confirm squirrel pox simply by looking at a squirrel. You can suspect it, but to get confirmation you must send it to a laboratory to get tested. However, if you do suspect squirrel pox at any time, please contact your local Red Squirrel group immediately with a picture of the individual and the exact location.
Yes, a very sad picture. Unfortunately, a squirrel pox that we have to deal with, and it's pretty much spread throughout England and already in the borders of Scotland, and it's also heading northwards from there. It's not quite, well, it has just about crossed the central belt of Scotland, and it's heading north. So it's pretty much widespread, and it's a matter of dealing with it. And living with it at the moment. There are some organisations, I believe the Ark Wildlife Trust, are seeking funding to further develop a vaccine for the squirrel pox. Not only are grey squirrels an issue for red squirrels, but they're also a tremendous issue for timber production and the health of our forests. So the next short video is going to cover that topic. I think it's about 7 minutes long, so enjoy.
Healthy trees are vital for a sustainable future, providing clean air and water, sequestering carbon, supplying timber, supporting wildlife and enhancing human health and well-being. Yet they're under increasing pressure from rapid climate change, from pests and diseases, and from invasive species that are spread around the world, deliberately or accidentally, through global trade and travel, and can cause major environmental, economic and societal issues. Originally from North America, grey squirrels were introduced to areas of England and Ireland between 1876 and 1929 for ornamental interest. But their spread across large areas of the British Isles has caused local extinctions of red squirrels and profoundly damaged tree health through their bark stripping activities.
Once the squirrel takes the bark off the tree, what happens is that it interrupts the sap flow. The sap flow is the kind of the blood, the juices that help the tree grow. And so all the energy and photosynthetic capacity that goes into the green leaf matter gets transported down through the phloem, and that's the stuff that gets damaged. It's what the squirrels are actually after. And it interrupts growth, normal growth, and interrupts total volume growth, but also the form. And it's the form thing that the foresters get very upset about. But the total growth is the thing that matters in terms of carbon sequestration and hence climate change.
Grey squirrels are one of the major threats to our woodlands, especially the creation of young mixed native woodlands, as they are basically destroying them.
Grey squirrels often target the healthiest and most vigorous trees, causing major damage and fatalities to ecologically and economically important broadleaf species.
You can see down here, there was a little trial site of damage that happened actually last summer. And the squirrel obviously liked this tree, so this summer's returned, and you can see up here, taking the bark from all the way up, and it's now killed the top of the tree. That matters to the economics of broadleaf woodland management, because once that tree is damaged, you fail to recover the value that you put into it in the first place. And whilst that might not sound insignificant, actually there are also other impacts. That tree will never achieve the great height that of the trees, mature trees that you see today. It'll just be a poorly misshapen tree. It will actually fail to deliver all the things that we're trying to deliver with climate change, and on the carbon front, it'll be suboptimal, considerably suboptimal on the carbon front. And what happens over time is it isn't just this tree. This was the first year. Slowly but surely it'll be that tree there and that tree there and that tree there, and you get an attrition. And over a period of 7 to 8 years, you might find that 30, 40, 50, 60, even 80%, even 90% of the trees are damaged.
While bark stripping causes major problems for hardwood timber growers, it also has a negative impact on the biodiversity that large trees can support as they grow and mature.
So in terms of the biodiversity side of the woodland, what we want is that some of our trees will replace eventually the big veteran trees which have their own ecosystems with the niches for plants and lichens, with niches for mammals and birds to nest and shelter, and the canopy shelter that they give to insects. So the problem with damage by grey squirrels, they don't just damage the timber potential of your woodland, they're going to stop your young trees becoming the next biodiverse generation of veteran trees. So there's a misconception, I think, that it's a great thing to have damaged trees. One of the things a lot of our woodlands are short of is deadwood. And there's a sort of misconception that a damaged tree provides more deadwood. But actually, the deadwood should be coming from old trees losing limbs or old trees having rot. But the squirrels are doing damage to young trees, and a damaged 20-year-old tree is not providing, that's not part of a healthy ecosystem to have that deadwood coming from a young tree. That tree should be vigorous and healthy and there to replace the high canopy in the future.
As science and technology evolves, new solutions to old problems are constantly being explored. In 2017, for example, the UK Squirrel Accord Partnership began research on an oral contraceptive for grey squirrels. Over the coming years, it's hoped this will offer an effective, less labour-intensive and non-lethal option for management.
The reason for this research comes mainly from public demand for alternatives to lethal methods to manage wildlife. The project supported by the UK Squirrel Accord is something we are particularly keen on because it's a multi-year project that gives us the possibility of both developing and testing new contraceptives, oral contraceptives for wildlife.
We've been involved and hope to be involved in some of the trial work on the new contraceptive that is being developed as a means of controlling grey squirrels. I think this is the great hope for us all, in that this could be an effective way of significantly reducing the grey squirrel population.
There's now a growing appreciation of the need to find new, innovative solutions and to raise greater awareness of the issues our trees face. To this end, the Yorkshire Arboretum is building a new tree health centre to provide a hub for education and knowledge sharing.
One of the things we want to do at the Tree Health Centre that we're building here at the Yorkshire Arboretum is to promote the concept of healthy trees in a healthy landscape for a healthy general environment for everyone. And that includes thinking about what trees to plant for the future. Do we plant things like sycamore, which are squirrel prone? Do we think of other things? Do we think of a mixture and so forth to counteract all this problem with tree pest diseases and squirrels? I think we need a healthy mixture in the woodland. We need sensible squirrel management and vigilance against all sorts of these problems that are affecting our trees.
As we lose increasing numbers of broadleaf trees to grey squirrel bark stripping alongside pests and diseases, it's crucial that we focus even more on protecting the health of these important species, working together to ensure a truly sustainable future.
So it's evident that grey squirrels are not only a problem in the north of England where we've got red squirrels, but they're also a problem for other parts of the country where woodland owners are attempting to establish woodlands for the future. So just moving on to what are we doing as Red Squirrels Northern England? Well, our main aim as a project is to maintain red squirrel range in Northern England. And how do we do this? Well, there's various areas that we're involved in. We've got a spring monitoring program that informs our squirrel range over time, and we'll touch on that a bit later. We do some direct grey squirrel management. Where we can, we support and empower local community-led conservation through supporting through training or grants where we can access those. And we collaborate with various partners, woodland owners, Forestry Commission, the UK Squirrel Accord, and the Animal Health Plant Agency that's just mentioned the fertility control product that they're working on. So grey squirrel management, does it work? Well, the short answer is yes, it definitely does work. If you are managing grey squirrel numbers within a woodland, you're suppressing that population, and simultaneously you will also be reducing the probability of the squirrelpox virus affecting the red squirrels there. A few years ago, Craig Shuttleworth from Red Squirrel Trust of Wales did some research on Anglesey. They trapped a good proportion of the grey squirrels on Anglesey in 2002, and they discovered 75% of those grey squirrels were carrying the squirrelpox disease. They thinned out that population, and again in 2010 they sampled the reduced grey squirrel population to see what proportion of those greys were carrying the disease, and it was only 4%. So definitely it does make a difference. Evidence from areas and research done in other areas of the country, for example in Dumfriesshire, it also showed that as this particular estate controlled and managed grey squirrels over a period of 4 years, you can see there's a constant number of grey squirrels coming in needing to be managed. Eventually, after about year 3, red squirrels start to come back. So yes, it does work. If you look at the map at the top left, and we'll look at this in a bit more detail, but it gives you an idea for the extent of the control network across the north of England. So wherever there's a little square or dot on the map, that's where somebody's done something to help red squirrels, so monitored or controlled grey squirrels. Looking at the next screen, again, whoops, let me just go back one. So again, top left, it's the same map again. If you look at the area of influence that each dot represents, presuming each dot has a sphere of influence of about 500 meters, which is a fair assumption, it totals up to about 234,000 hectares across the north of England. Now, of that area where there is effort to control greys or protect red squirrels, 68% of that area is within Cumbria, and about 32% of that area of influence is in Northumberland. Now, very different demographics in those two counties. Much fewer people live in Northumberland, so it would make sense. And then in Cumbria, the contribution that RSNE, Red Squirrels Northern England, contribute towards the area is 13%, and in the northeast, Northumberland, it's 27%. This is just zoomed in to the area. So the map on the left demonstrates where somebody is effecting some effort. The yellow squares represent local groups, and the blue squares represent where RSNE's rangers or contractors have been active. The rangers our rangers tend to be active in areas in between groups and red squirrel strongholds. On the right-hand side, the map just shows you the total number of grey squirrels removed from the landscape. This is just Cumbria, which I'll just quickly leave on the screen for a few seconds, but you can see clearly a much greater effort. Again, some of these groups have been established for 30 years, so a little bit ahead of Northumberland. Encouragingly, this is the red squirrel distribution, and this is only looking at these maps are only looking at 2020 results, but very encouraging to see red squirrel range being maintained, considering the maps we initially looked at of the reduction in range from 1945 through 2010. And it's by and large thanks to the local volunteer community-led squirrel groups that we have this situation where we still have red squirrels in the north of England. So more than 80% of the effort and the grey control is affected by local groups. So it's thanks to them we still have reds in the north of England. A tremendous effort. RSNE ourselves also collaborate with 19 landowners across the 2 counties, more or less equally split, who have helped access Countryside Stewardship Grant Scheme. This is a government grant scheme that runs for 5 years for woodland improvement and pays £100 a hectare. So if you know any landowners interested in the scheme, give us a shout. We'd be happy to assist them onto the scheme. The monitoring program is very important to inform us as to what's happening out there. Essentially, there are 300 sites. We call them tetrads. A tetrad is a 2 by 2 kilometer square sampling area, and we sample these in the spring using, by and large, trail cameras and feeder boxes. There are also some baited visual transect, so that's a kilometer route that somebody walks, and then there are observed feeders in some people's gardens, but mainly trail cameras that we use. And yeah, this is just a typical setup where you've got a camera opposite a feeder, and there's the feeder. The hair samples are also collected from the feeder boxes, just as a backup method in case the cameras malfunction, and we can analyze those hairs and determine whether it's a red squirrel, grey squirrel, mouse, or pine marten or something else. So yeah, that takes a little bit of getting used to and learning how to do it, but red squirrel hairs are obviously very different when looked at under a microscope, so very notable differences once you've tuned your eye into it. So results from 2019, I mean, the last survey was, obviously last year it was not possible. So over 170 people involved, 86% of those are volunteers, 290 sites surveyed, and what it's doing is sampling the squirrel occupancy of those sites. So of those 290 sites, 45.9% detected grey squirrels and 43.4% were red squirrels. This graph is really important and quite key because it shows that occupancy change over time, you know, using the same survey methodology at the same sites over time. This is a scientific, robust method to show that red squirrel range, if you observe from 2015 through to 2019, that line, that occupancy proportion is remaining relatively stable, and that is really good news. That means we are helping red squirrels maintain their range. Now I'm going to quickly just play just over a 10-minute video just to explain a little bit what the monitoring program is about and how you do it, mainly through using the camera method. So just bear with me while I get that ready. Technical challenges with that particular file, it looks like. I might have to skip that one. That's a shame. No, it doesn't want to play. Nevertheless, we'll carry on. It's a shame that one didn't want to play, but effectively it was just a video out in the field just showing how you set up a feeder box and how you install the camera opposite it, just the technical side of doing it. We'll carry on. So looking at alternatives, so we've talked about monitoring, we've talked about grey squirrel control. Now there are other developments out there, and pine martens is one of them. Are they going to help solve the problem? Well, they're a natural predator of grey squirrels and red squirrels, and a study in 2007, which was published in 2014 by Emma Sheehy, demonstrated that over an extensive area in Central Ireland, Pine martens started to really do well and spread. And simultaneously, they found that grey squirrel numbers started to decrease, but also red squirrel numbers started to increase. So grey squirrels population numbers went down and red squirrel numbers went up, whilst pine marten numbers went up as well. Obviously, our red squirrels and pine martens have coexisted in the past and they've co-evolved together. The mechanism why this happened is not quite fully understood, but nevertheless interesting. Okay, to the next slide. This is a study that was repeated in Scotland, again by Emma Sheehy, and it showed exactly the same thing. So there's 3 different sites, north, central, and the borders. There were some surveys done, and again, the same was found. Wherever you had grey squirrels and pine martens together, the grey squirrel population would come down. And wherever you found pine martens and red squirrels, the red squirrel population went up. So it's a very interesting development and something to be keeping an eye out for. Do we have pine martens in northern England? Well, yes, they are just naturally spreading into Northumberland and some parts of northern Cumbria. This is from pine marten population in Scotland, in the borders. So it's a very interesting development which we're keeping an eye on. Do they predate on red squirrels? Well, yes, they do. The study that Emma did in Ireland established that the proportion of pine marten diet was relatively less. So grey squirrels, I think, was around about 15% proportion of their diet, and red squirrels was around about 4%. You've got to remember that pine martens are not going to exert as much energy as they need to if they've got an easy meal. So they're not going to chase after animals if they can have a free meal elsewhere. Anyway, so those are roughly the percentages of in their diet of those 2 species. This is a pine marten that appeared on one of our cameras in 2018 in Kielder Forest. So yes, definitely they are there. The next one, the next development that's happening is the development of a fertility control for grey squirrels. And this is coordinated and managed through the UK Squirrel Accord and the Animal and Plant Health Agency. As some good progress is being made, obviously a contraceptive will have to have no side effects on the animal, its welfare. There must be no long-term effects. It must be specific to the species you're targeting, so there must be no side effects, as well as no effects to the food chain like predators or risk to humans. And it must be affordable and deliverable in the field in large proportions. So still a lot of work to do, but good progress is being made. Potential vaccine is being developed and it's being tested again over the next few months, but it's still a long time off because with pharmaceutical products, it takes time to develop and license, especially the licensing part can take very long. Now, the delivery mechanism has to be target specific. In other words, it has to target grey squirrels specifically and not reds. So this is something that the research team at the Animal and Plant Health Agency are looking at and need to address. So they're looking at various solutions. I know they've looked at weight-based feeders, and they're also starting to look at color sensors. Anyway, it's something really important that needs to be resolved before it can be deployed, especially in red squirrel range. But it's obviously something that's really important nationally and further south as well. How can you help red squirrels? Well, various things to do. So help out monitoring, not only the RSNE spring monitoring program, but also in your local area. Link up with your local group and help monitoring to detect where there are greys when they incur into your area so that a response can be organized. The spring monitoring program has over 300 sites, as I mentioned, and those are spread quite across the north of England, and those are the different sites. This picture was just taken a few weeks ago up at Kilda. 2 reds on the tree there. Grey squirrel management, if you are able to become involved with your local group to support grey squirrel management. Great local groups do have their own training, but we're also working in collaboration with British Red Squirrels to develop a Lantro approved training course, which should hopefully be available later this year. Supplementary feeding, if you're going to help your local squirrels through feeding, it's pretty easy to make your own feeder box quite inexpensively. There are a few tips on what to feed and what not to feed. Have a look on our website, but essentially, squirrels are happy to eat sunflower seeds, not too many peanuts because they can cause calcium deficiency in squirrels. Generally, red squirrels don't like maize. They do eat it, but it's often a bait that we use for grey squirrels. Hazelnuts, obviously, they love hazelnuts. Link up with your local red squirrel group. If you go onto the website northernredsquirrels.org.uk, you can zoom into the map under the membership menu and find your local group and the contact details. And of course, you can support Red Squirrel Northern England by becoming a member of our Friends of the Red Squirrel that sends out, every 6 months we send out a newsletter, but it's also a means of supporting the work that we do. So that was a quick whiz through everything we do, and now hopefully we can have some time to go through the various questions. And just bear with me a few seconds while I find that. All right. So I've just unmuted Mike, my colleague. Mike is project officer for Red Squirrels Northern England in Northumberland, just to help me with some of the questions if need be. Okay, so can reds recover from squirrel pox if it's caught early? Yes, if it is caught early. First of all, it's very difficult to know for sure whether it's squirrel pox or not. There are other diseases that affect red squirrels that look very similar in terms of the symptoms. So you do need to, the best thing is to catch it and take it to your local vet where they can investigate and treat it. But yes, there's an antibiotic that can be administered early on, but it needs to be very early on. By the time the virus has taken hold of the red squirrel and it's starting to become lethargic and it's got scabs, it's probably a bit late already. It is wise to still trap it and take it to the vet where the vet can make a decision. Obviously that animal is a risk to other red squirrels in the population, so it's a good idea to take it to the vet. Is tree bark damage exclusively caused by grey squirrels? Because simple answer is no. Red squirrels do some damage as well. However, the densities at which you find grey squirrels living in a forest, there's so many of them that the damage they cause is so severe in comparison to red squirrels. It's very bad. It's estimated the annual damage of grey squirrel bark stripping to the forest industry is about £4 million. That figure does vary. Right, I think there's space for more questions. It's time for more questions if anybody else has got any questions. Mike, I don't know if you've seen any more questions pop up on the...
No, I haven't seen any more on the chat.
Okay, let me see if I can unmute those who want to unmute and ask us any questions. Just bear in mind the background noise from your microphone will be picked up. So if you want to remain muted, just press the mute button. Is there an explanation for the red numbers increasing in the highlands when pine martens were present, if there was not a significant grey population in that region? So this, if I understand the question correctly, red numbers were increasing in the highlands and pine martens were present. Well, that's sort of the effect that we find. I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly.
It was a question. It was a question from me. It was just the graph obviously showed in sort of I guess the lower lowland and sort of middle area of Scotland that grey numbers decreased in relation to pine martens coming back.
Yeah.
And on the right hand side, it had red numbers increasing in all three regions where the study was happening. But I wasn't sure. It didn't have anything about sort of grey numbers decreasing in the Highlands. So I sort of understand the relationship where you have pine martens coming back and they decrease the grey population, then the reds can recover. But in the Highlands, if there wasn't a significant grey population, the reds still, I just thought it was interesting that the reds still increased in that area. So there must have been another element to it.
They will have used areas where they have had all three species so that they can produce those results.
Yeah.
Reds, greys.
Will local groups be able to help with the trials of the contraceptive feeders? Yes. There'll be some local groups who will be helping with that. It's not been determined. It's a bit early for that, which groups are going to help with that. But if you're interested, let us know. Is there any research into squirrel pox regarding a vaccine that could be administered to reds? Yes, I think I mentioned early on that the Ark Wildlife Trust are working on progressing the development of a squirrel pox vaccine. Again, it's probably going to be a number of years before there's a product available off the shelf, if you like. Is it going to solve our problem? I'm not convinced. It will help. I think everything we have to have in the toolbox. If you combine grey squirrel control with all these other opportunities or developments, it's certainly all collectively going to make the necessary difference. Doing lethal control at this stage is still very much essential, and all these other methods will be complementary and help us to deal, for example, with a local pox outbreak potentially. But as far as I'm aware, there is not yet a squirrel pox vaccine that is available in a feeder-based delivery system. Can anyone tell me a time that there were still reds in West Yorkshire? Anybody around the table? In the North Yorkshire Dales, there are red squirrels at present. Don't know if that's near enough. And the National Park in North Yorkshire Moors are still working on collaborating with local communities to conserve them. Just looking at any other questions. Any other questions that anybody want to ask around the table through the microphone? There's somebody just posted a comment saying that recent collaborative report led by Royal Forestry Society assess grey squirrel damage to trees in England and Wales, which is estimated to cost 34 million a year in lost timber value, reduced carbon capture, etc. Yeah, so I said 40 million, so that's close enough. 37 million. There are other areas that grey squirrel damage as well, infrastructure and buildings, etc. I think the total estimate was £64 million per annum. Can a vaccine for red squirrels be delivered via food? Sure, it's possible, but it's not at that stage in terms of the development just yet. We've had 2 reds visiting our feeders in Swaland daily, but since some recent loud noises in the adjacent caravan park, we haven't seen them for a few days. So can loud noises disturb a breeding pair of it, and even worse, make them leave their dray? I would say it is probably unlikely that they would leave because of that. Some research that's been done in Scotland observing the behavior of red squirrels during tree felling or thinning operations showed that they just temporarily moved away, but then came back, and sometimes even came back during the operations. So they don't seem to be affected by noise so much, I'm afraid. Is there anything I can do from an area that no longer has reds other than donation to help? It depends whereabout you are, how far you are away from local red squirrel population. Potentially becoming involved in keeping an eye on the development of fertility control, because that's an area that's going to become important in the future. Because it's not only red squirrel areas where greys have an impact, but it's also the impact on timber production as mentioned. Do you think gene driver technology is likely to play a part in controlling grey squirrels? Probably in the future, yet there's still so much we still need to understand and be reassured of. It's a young technology. I do know that the University of Edinburgh, I think, are looking into this. And the concept behind it is that you breed a small population of grey squirrels with a genetic, a skewed genetic identity that when they mate with females, the females will only produce males, and eventually you'll flood the population with only grey squirrel males, and therefore there'll be no more females to breed with. So that's the idea behind it, as far as I'm aware, but it's still a long way off, and researchers will need to reassure us that there is no negative effects. And I think they'll probably also need to reassure not only us, but the public that it's a safe technology to apply. I hope we've got all the questions. I've paged through top to bottom, and I think we've got all of them. So unless there's anybody else would like to ask last question or two. So I do realize I went through the presentation slides very quickly. There's so much happening in the red squirrel conservation world, so many developments, so many areas we're involved in. It's very detailed and very busy working in this field. I can just encourage everybody to get involved locally if you're able to, and with your local red squirrel group. It's not only monitoring and grey squirrel management that needs doing. There's a lot of other work that needs doing, administration, fundraising, public awareness raising, through local schools and communities and networks. There's so much that you can help with. Don't feel like even if you're not physically able to get out there, there are ways that you can help and make an enormous difference to your local group and to make a difference for Red Schools. So I'm going to end it off there, more or less on time. I thank everybody for joining us this evening to listen to our talk. And if you've got any questions, or you think of any questions that we've missed or you think of later, just email me or Mike, and we'll try as best as we can to respond and answer your questions. So thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully that was informative and interesting. I just saw somebody said they joined late. I'll send me your email address and I'll forward you a link to the presentation slides. And thank you, everybody, and I'll say goodbye for now. Thank you for joining us this evening. Bye for now.
Thanks, Heinz.
You're welcome.
Bye, Heinz.
Bye. See ya.